November 22, 1963. A gunshot echoes across Dealey Plaza. A presidency is ended. A nation is changed. But behind the gun, behind the headlines, was a storm decades in the making. This is the story of how the forces Kennedy threatened finally collided, and why his death was not an accident of history. It was the enforcement of a new world order. It was the perfect storm. This is the final video in our series on the JFK assassination. I would encourage you to look at our other videos that go more in-depth with a long list of events that led to this tragic event.
No one's listening.
Lyndon B. Johnson, Kennedy's vice president. Publicly, the loyal number 2, privately, a man in crisis. In 1963, Johnson was facing multiple corruption investigations: the Bobby Baker scandal, the Billy Saul Estes scandal, and the TFX fighter jet contract scandal. Bobby Baker, Johnson's protege and Senate aide, was accused of influence peddling and securing government contracts in exchange for kickbacks. Billy Saul Estes, a Texas agricultural businessman and Johnson associate, implicated in fraudulent cotton allotments and loans, who hinted at LBJ's direct involvement in criminal activity. TFX scandal. Allegations that Johnson pressured the Department of Defense to award a military contract to General Dynamics, headquartered in Texas, raising suspicions of cronyism and profiteering. This being said, I would urge you to not take these scandals at face value, given recent present-day events and seeing how easily scandals can be fabricated with the media. I will be making videos going in-depth with LBJ scandals, and more so that you can decide for yourself. Rumors swirled that Kennedy intended to drop LBJ from the 1964 ticket. Without Kennedy's protection, Johnson faced not just political ruin, but prison. But the relationship between Kennedy and Johnson had always been tense. JFK didn't particularly like LBJ. He found him crude, overbearing, and politically opportunistic. Johnson, meanwhile, resented the Kennedys' wealth, privilege, and East Coast elitism. So why did JFK pick him as his running mate? It was a calculated political move. Kennedy needed the Southern vote in 1960. Johnson, an influential Texan, could deliver the South, including critical swing states. Bringing LBJ onto the ticket was a strategic alliance, not a personal friendship. And why didn't JFK drop him in 1964, even with all the scandal? Because removing a sitting vice president mid-term would have risked party unity. It could have divided the Democratic base, handed ammunition to political enemies, and destabilized the administration heading into an election year. Johnson had deep ties to Texas oil billionaires, friendships with CIA power players, links to organized crime figures like Malcolm Wallace, alleged to have been his personal fixer and whose fingerprints were reportedly found at the Texas School Book Depository. The Billy Saul Estes tapes, released decades later in 2003, include testimony where Estes alleges that Johnson was involved in multiple murders, including that of Henry Marshall, a USDA official investigating fraud. Estes claimed that Wallace carried out the hits under Johnson's orders. Though never confirmed by prosecution, the tapes are frequently cited in conspiracy research as circumstantial evidence of LBJ's willingness to use violence for self-preservation. And then there's this quote, attributed to LBJ the night before the assassination. "After tomorrow, those goddamn Kennedys will never embarrass me again." That's no threat. That's a promise. Was Johnson the mastermind? Maybe not. But was he a willing participant, or a man who stood aside while the storm built? Highly likely. Dealey Plaza, Dallas. JFK was in Dallas TX as part of a 2-day tour of the state to promote unity and support for his 1964 re-election bid. His motorcade route was changed at the last minute, a turn onto Elm Street that brought him directly in front of the Texas School Book Depository. Security protocols were ignored. The Secret Service detail was reduced. Motorcycle escorts were repositioned. Open windows along the route were left unmonitored. At 12:30 p.m., the limousine turned down Elm Street. 3 shots rang out. Eyewitnesses reported hearing shots from multiple directions. Many believed one came from behind the picket fence atop the grassy knoll. The Zapruder film shows Kennedy's head snapping back and to the left, suggesting a frontal shot. Ballistics experts have long debated whether Oswald's rifle could account for the timing and angles. Kennedy's final words were to Nellie Connolly, "No, you certainly can't say that the people of Dallas haven't given us a nice welcome." Seconds later, he was fatally struck. Jackie Kennedy, splattered in blood, crawled onto the back of the car, not to flee, but to retrieve fragments of her husband's skull. The horror was filmed. The world saw it. And yet, the truth remained elusive. But Dallas wasn't the only attempt on Kennedy's life. There were at least 2 known assassination attempts in Florida, just days before Dallas. November 18, 1963, Tampa, Florida. JFK visited Tampa as part of a multi-city Florida tour. A plot to ambush him during a motorcade was uncovered. The conspirators reportedly intended to position themselves along the motorcade's original route. The Secret Service altered the route last minute, uncovering the plan through informants and surveillance. November 19, 1963, Miami, Florida. A separate threat emerged involving anti-Castro Cuban exiles. A Miami police officer later reported arresting a man with a high-powered rifle who admitted he planned to shoot the president. These events were downplayed in the media but documented in Warren Commission files. The commission even acknowledged these attempts in testimony, connecting them through informant networks and behavioral similarities. Was Dallas the final attempt or the first one that succeeded? It didn't take long for the official story to fall apart. Almost immediately, inconsistencies began to pile up. Witnesses heard multiple shots. The trajectory didn't make sense, and too many people who saw what happened ended up dead. Let's start with the wounds. According to the official report, Kennedy was hit twice, once in the upper back, which exited through his throat, once in the head, the fatal shot. But doctors at Parkland Hospital initially described an entry wound in the throat, suggesting a shot from the front. Others described a massive exit wound in the rear of the skull, not the side, as the autopsy later claimed. The magic bullet theory, later pushed by the Warren Commission, claimed a single bullet passed through Kennedy's body, then struck Texas Governor John Connally in the chest, wrist, and thigh. That's 7 wounds, from one bullet, that somehow emerged nearly intact. Now let's talk about the strange disappearances. Numerous witnesses, especially those whose accounts contradicted the official narrative, died under suspicious circumstances in the years following the assassination. Journalists, police officers, informants, car crashes, heart attacks, suicides, a statistically improbable number of deaths, too many to dismiss as coincidence. The Babushka lady, a woman seen calmly filming the assassination, wearing a headscarf, her footage was never recovered. Her identity was never confirmed. She stood closer to the motorcade than most. She would have had a direct view of the shooter. Was she silenced? Second shooter theory, over 40 witnesses said they heard shots from the grassy knoll. Several even ran toward that area convinced a shooter was there. A puff of smoke, a flash, a metallic noise. None of it matches the claim that Oswald fired alone from 6 stories up behind the president. Acoustic evidence. In 1978, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reviewed a police motorcycle radio recording from the scene. A scientific analysis concluded at least 4 shots were fired. The committee stated, Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, but no further action was taken. Meanwhile, the Warren Commission, established by President Johnson to investigate the assassination, quickly settled on the lone gunman theory. Chaired by Chief Justice Earl Warren, included members like Gerald Ford, John McCloy, and Senator Richard Russell. Russell later admitted he disagreed with the lone bullet theory but was overruled by the commission. John McCloy had previously served as president of the World Bank and High Commissioner for Germany. His involvement raised red flags about intelligence ties. Gerald Ford would later become president and was accused of altering the location of JFK's back wound in commission materials to better support the lone shooter theory. Further suspicion emerged when it was revealed that no members of the public, media, or independent investigators were ever allowed into the 6th floor window room where Oswald supposedly fired the shots. The crime scene was sanitized, evidence was quickly removed, and the building was reopened to the public shortly after. These inconsistencies, the secrecy, the contradictions, the conveniently overlooked testimony, formed the earliest cracks in the official version. They weren't just coincidences, they were signals, and the public was beginning to notice. But all of this was leading to who was this killer, this lone gunman? Lee Harvey Oswald. Who was he really? A former United States Marine who defected to the Soviet Union in 1959. Oswald lived in Minsk, married a Russian woman, and returned to the United States in 1962. He came back to America with little hassle, raising eyebrows even back then. How could a Cold War defector return so easily? Oswald was under surveillance almost immediately. He associated with both pro-Castro and anti-Castro groups. He distributed leaflets. He appeared erratic, but he was always in the right place at the wrong time. In Mexico City, just weeks before the assassination, Oswald visited both the Cuban and Soviet embassies. CIA surveillance picked up on it. Documents now declassified show that CIA officers in Mexico had audio and visual tracking of Oswald, or someone pretending to be him. Confusion still exists about whether it was really Oswald on the tapes. This raises one of the great questions. Was Oswald a double agent? A CIA asset? A manipulated pawn? After the assassination, Oswald fled the scene, was later arrested in a movie theater and said, "I'm just a patsy." Then came Jack Ruby. 2 days after the assassination, as Oswald was being transferred from police custody, Ruby shot him on live television. Ruby, a nightclub owner with known mob connections, claimed it was an act of patriotism, but later reports revealed he was in deep with organized crime. He had ties to Chicago outfit figures and had reportedly bragged about his connections. While in prison, Ruby's mental and physical health deteriorated rapidly. He died in 1967, still insisting he had acted alone. But by then, the damage was done. Oswald was silenced, the only man who could speak directly to what really happened. Gone, and the deeper truth, once again, buried. The Warren Commission was the official body appointed by President Lyndon Johnson to investigate the assassination of President Kennedy. Its mission was to bring clarity, reassurance, and finality. Instead, it delivered decades of suspicion. The commission was led by Chief Justice Earl Warren and included prominent figures like Gerald Ford, future president, later accused of altering the wound placement diagram; John McCloy, banker, diplomat, and former president of the World Bank; Senator Richard Russell, a powerful Southern Democrat. Despite being one of the most senior members, Senator Russell strongly disagreed with the commission's central claim, the lone gunman theory. Russell believed there was more than one shooter. He found the single bullet theory unconvincing and told confidants he had been pressured to sign the final report, despite his objections. In later interviews and personal writings, he claimed the commission misrepresented his views and overruled his dissent. He even told President Johnson directly that he did not believe the findings. Why would someone with that much power go along with something he didn't believe? Some say he feared the implications. Others say he knew the real enemy wasn't Oswald. It was the system itself. The Warren Commission relied heavily on FBI and CIA reports, but many of those reports were incomplete, falsified, or withheld. Even worse, Allen Dulles, the CIA director JFK had fired after the Bay of Pigs, was placed on the commission itself. Think about that. The man Kennedy distrusted most, the man who had the most to lose if the CIA was implicated, was given oversight of the investigation. Dulles guided the narrative. He shaped witness interviews. He defended the CIA's integrity. And the result? The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. It ignored or downplayed acoustic evidence, eyewitness testimony contradicting the official timeline, the strange deaths of witnesses, the documented ties between Oswald and both intelligence and underworld networks. Instead, it constructed a timeline that fit the desired conclusion. It sealed its records for decades, it discouraged independent inquiry, and it enshrined a version of history many never believed. JFK didn't just lead a nation. He challenged a machine. He threatened to dismantle systems that profited from war, secrecy, and corruption. He opposed the unchecked powers of the CIA, the ambitions of the military-industrial complex, and the growing influence of organized crime in American institutions. JFK pushed for nuclear disarmament, reining in the Federal Reserve, ending the Vietnam War, investigating the CIA's covert programs. He issued NSAM 263, planning for the withdrawal of 1,000 troops from Vietnam by the end of 1963. He tried to bring intelligence operations under executive oversight. He rejected Operation Northwoods, a false flag plan to justify war with Cuba. He had grown up surrounded by the very people who benefited from this system, his father among them. But somewhere along the way, he turned. He saw it for what it was. And he tried to pull the plug. By the time he realized just how deep the rot went, it was too late. He stood against everything the deep state needed to survive: endless war, compromised politicians, clandestine power. And so, they ended him. Not for who he was, but for what he represented. A future where the people ruled, not the shadows. So, where are we today? Decades later, we're still fighting to uncover the truth. In 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order directing the full release of remaining classified JFK assassination files. Thousands were released, but many were still redacted, especially those referencing Israel, intelligence sources, and international partners. Documents related to RFK's assassination and the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. were also scheduled for release, but those remain sealed. What are they still hiding? Why redact information 60 years later? Why are foreign allies still protected? Even in 2023, journalists and historians are still submitting FOIA requests, still hitting walls, still fighting a bureaucracy built to outlast curiosity. Because it's not just about Kennedy, it's about every president since. John F. Kennedy died not just because he made enemies, but because he challenged a system built on endless war, covert manipulation, fusion of crime, business, and government. And the system survived. The deep state was born, and with it, a new kind of America. We live under the illusion of transparency, but cracks are forming, files are leaking, testimonies are surfacing. The truth is still breathing, and one day, it might speak loud enough to shatter the noise.
No one's listening. Like and subscribe.